Some leaders leave footprints, others leave libraries. You're tuning into the Authors on Mission podcast, where industry giants become literacy legends. In every episode, we talk with authors who turn their brilliance into books that transform lives. I'm Danielle Hutchinson, your host and Chief Creative Officer at Authors on Mission. Welcome to your authorship experience. Hello, everybody, and welcome to Authors on Mission podcast, the podcast committed to bringing you top-tier insights and strategies from established experts who've achieved remarkable success in their fields and wrote about it. I'm thrilled to introduce today's guest, Hersh Rephun, whose fascinating story might be described as professionally unpredictable, personally unmistakable. He is the author of Selling the Truth, a memoir with insights for life and business. It's a pretty honest guide to authentic branding that combines memoir with business wisdom. And what's really going to be cool about this conversation is that Hersh has lived the struggle of many of us face, trying to create a brand that feels authentic rather than contrived, powerful rather than emotional. So we're going to talk all about his experiences, his tips for the writing process as well. And with all that said, grab your notebook, maybe a mirror, because this conversation might just challenge you to see yourself and your business in a new light. Without further ado, Hersh, welcome to the Authors on Mission podcast.
Thank you, Danielle. It's great to be here with you. I'm really excited for our conversation.
Yeah, same here. I love having new people on all the time. I get to learn something new, and so do our listeners. So really excited to just dive right in. I'm wondering if you can just start off by telling us a little bit about yourself, getting us a little bit more information about you, because your life has taken many different turns, especially a career path going from screenwriting to PR to comedy to brand strategy and now authorship. So I'm wondering, first off, what led to these different turns? And also, do you notice any common threads that kind of connect these different pursuits you've taken?
Yeah, those are great questions, both of them, because as you pointed out in the intro, I've kind of taken the road less traveled, and when I look back at what I started to do professionally or what I thought I would do, like so many of us, it doesn't seem like a straight line. And that's kind of why I do what I do now in personal brand building and why I wrote the book. But I started out, I think my earliest plan was to be an actor or a comedian. I was a comedian in New York, where I was studying advertising at School of Visual Arts. I actually was studying filmmaking at School of Visual Arts, and just because the chairman of the school suggested I take an advertising course, I did. But I did not feel like I would fit in at big companies. I didn't want to work for big advertising agencies, anything like that. And my first job was representing directors of TV commercials, and I didn't even know there was such a thing. There are, like, at this point, there's got to be 10,000 directors in the DGA, in the Directors Guild, that just do commercials. But at the time, it was like a new thing. But I loved being very close to the filmmakers. Like, if I had gotten a job, let's say in the mailroom at CAA or something, and I was wanting to be a screenwriter or be in the film business, I'd never really stand out or get too close to anybody. And here I was, I met the Coen brothers. I had lunch with Eric Clapton. It was like, these were like very cool experiences, considering I was really just a director's rep, but still we were very heavily involved in their careers in advertising. So I gravitated toward doing PR for them, because to me, the idea of championing other creatives was really exciting. That's why I'm excited about being on your show, because championing other authors, kind of, that stuff is very interesting to me, because I relate to people who do similar things to myself. So it was a weird feeling in a way, because I felt like, well, maybe I should be the star, I should be the writer, I should be the director. But what I was really drawn to throughout my career was always championing other people's ambitions and helping them achieve them. And even when I did stand-up comedy, I would do a lot of voices, characters, things like that. And I thought it was because I had a great ear for comedy, but it really was that I have a good ear for people's conversation. So when I was writing screenplays, I had an ear for dialogue. When I was doing stand-up comedy, I had an ear for mimicry. When I started doing branding, I had an ear for what the audience wanted to hear. And that kind of led me to personal brand building, where I was like, okay, I can talk to somebody for 10 minutes, listen to their view of themselves and what they do and what they want to accomplish, and then I can imagine how their audience wants to hear it, and that way I help guide them to the exposure and the authority they want.
Okay, yes. So you really have gone through many different stages, as we said before, and it's great to see that you kind of grew from each of them. You learned something from each of those stages. And I'm sure that your own personal beliefs had to kind of change along the way too, depending on how you would, handle situations, how you address people. For example, I was looking through your materials and you told me, you kind of discussed something called a little kid syndrome. So I feel like sometimes when you're getting into a new role, you might feel like a child talking to authority figures. I'm sure you had to deal with that a lot, jumping from, one domain to another domain to another domain. Do you agree with that? Or perhaps maybe...
What I never thought about it that way in terms of the through line of it.
Yeah, I know you talk about it for business and leadership. I was kind of that too. I feel like it might go two ways. I'm not sure.
Yeah, no, that's interesting because I was probably intimidated by, if I move from one sector to another, on the one hand, I'm being a little bit brave to do it. On the other hand, I'm going into an area where I'm not the expert. So I'm going from, stand-up comedy to screenwriting to sales and marketing, and all the time I'm learning, and I'm not coming in as the top dog or the leader. And I think I got used to this idea that I was the junior person. But as I got older and I had my own companies, I wouldn't feel that way with the people who worked for me. But quite often I would feel like in a room, I was the younger person. And I think it just maybe protected me from being too big-headed or growing too large. Not just in my own mind. I think it was a problem because I think that, when you don't take your power into your own hands, your destiny into your own hands, you can get swept away in things you don't want to do. And I think there was some of that where that little kid syndrome was like, I wasn't the least knowledgeable person. I wasn't the least accomplished. As you get further in your career, you gain hopefully stature and knowledge, and it took me a while to kind of step into that.
Understood. Yeah, and I do see that we took a different take on that insight that you have in your book, but I think it's interesting to kind of apply it to other areas as well. That being said, perhaps we could enlighten the listeners today a little bit more about your true intention with that one, about how this theory of the little kid syndrome works when you're approaching your own leadership in businesses. I assume it's not quite too different than what you just described, but I'm wondering if there's any, tips and insights you could offer as a little sneak peek to what you discussed in the book.
Well, yeah. I mean, a big tip is that so much revolves around confidence. The sales, it doesn't matter what you're doing, research, everything revolves around confidence, because if you take the assumption that you're less than, when you go into that room, even if they admire you or whatever it might be, they're going to pick up on that weakness, on that vulnerability. And I also talk a lot in the book about, BS artists and con artists and things like that we get subjected to and sometimes taken advantage of. And so I'm thinking, well, if you make yourself the smaller person, either out of modesty or insecurity, the other person will take that role of being bigger.
Right. Just naturally.
And so, yeah, eventually. And, I tell my kids also, don't negative self-talk, because, we're going to keep cheering you on, but other people may start to believe you. If you say, oh, I'm this, I'm that, I'm not smart, I'm not, if you say those things, people will eventually accept it because they don't have an investment in you.
Yeah, exactly. And it's kind of, if you're putting yourself in that role, they're naturally going to step into the opposite counteractive role, so it's kind of, you have to put your foot forward and decide and define who you want to be in these scenarios. I can see how that's what selling truth must be really highlighting. I'm wondering if you would like to share a little bit more about the book in general. For example, I was looking through it and you talk a little bit about the 9 knowings of selling the truth. This is kind of one of the biggest things you discuss and the things that we can learn from the book. So did you personally master all of these, or would you say these are things you're currently working toward?
I think, well, here's the book. It's back there too, but
I was looking at it in the background there.
See it. But there are some that I have mastered, and that's how I figured it out. And there are some that I continue to struggle with, or that you don't necessarily master them. I would say that just to pull a couple of them out, before you brand yourself, know yourself is a really important one. It took me a long time to master it. I don't think I mastered it until I finally figured out that my superpower was not performative. It wasn't like talking or writing or communicating. My superpower was listening. And I was like, when I started podcasting, I had a guest say, oh my gosh, you're such an amazing listener. And I never thought that I was a great listener because I thought I was a performer. Performers tend not to listen. Performers tend to just want to talk. But I
guess you have to listen to your audience, though, right? Not to interrupt.
Yes.
There is an element, I would say.
Yeah, there is. But a lot of performers don't think about that. They think about, oh, they're going to be good talkers. Another one is third party validation is really important. A lot of us, we understand testimonials and things like that. But I talk about in the book the idea that it's so much easier for us to not have to tell people how great we are. It's not even about ego. It's like, one of the reasons I liked being on stage was because I didn't have to introduce myself. That's hard. Like I have a hard time at parties and things, just introducing myself and explaining who I am. It sounds funny for someone who's done, so much communicating, but it is true. And I think that, in the book, I get to kind of lay the groundwork for that stuff and show people by examples how important that is. But I think I've gotten pretty good at some of these.
Yeah, and I always like kind of tricking people a little bit because I kind of turned it a little bit rather than saying, so what are some of these, have you mastered it yourself? It's always interesting to see if people, walk the talk, I guess you could say.
Oh, yeah. Well, it's called selling the truth. So you have to, you have to hold yourself to a little bit of a higher standard there, which I think is a good practice, right? You say, okay, I'm really gonna keep it real.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that also has a lot to do with your personality and your beliefs. You talk a lot about your spiritual development, for example. So, you're not about to just preach something you don't believe. You've been really immersed in the past about, meditation, quantum consciousness. So I can only imagine that this really inspired your approach to this.
Yeah. And I think, again, it's a journey. I was raised Jewish and Orthodox, so it was a kind of strict upbringing. It was very happy upbringing, very happy childhood. But, I questioned stuff. And as I would question things, I would learn more about myself. And I feel like the spiritual stuff that I've done in meditation and quantum consciousness and all these things have connected me even more, to the foundational stuff I learned as a kid. I think the lessons I learned as a kid were much more about how to conduct yourself in the world as a human being and less about the high-minded religious ideals, like all the world's religions tend to have a lot of these same concepts. And if we just look at the concepts of human, relations and dignity and empathy and honesty and all that stuff, these are just foundational lessons that, we need to maybe reinforce as we get older.
Yeah, I guess so. And again, as you get older, the more experiences you have, the more ways you can be implementing these ideas too, I'm sure. So yeah, I mean, kind of drawing back into the book itself then, you share a lot of your own experiences again, and you relate it back to the humor and your idea and the whole experience you had at being comedy. So how do you use the humor in your writing to discuss these truths and these tips? I'm sure there's plenty of tidbits and jokes and things that make people chuckle along with learning the facts. Would that be the case?
Yeah, I think that humor is, number one, a great icebreaker. First of all, if you're laughing at yourself a little bit, it puts people at ease. If you show that you don't take everything super seriously and that it's so precious to you that you can't allow anyone to have fun with it, that creates tension. And right. Comedy is really all about creating and releasing tension. I mean, if you think about it, let's say a comedian's on stage and they're telling a story, and the story gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, and it builds up to this big punchline. The longer they do that, the bigger the punchline, the bigger the release. And that's what laughter is a release. So I tried in the book to really just be myself. I mean, I wasn't sitting there going, there's not enough humor here. I never thought that. I just wrote the way I write. And writing is different from talking. So if it was a speech that I was giving or a keynote, I probably would have to calibrate it a little differently. You're doing a multi-sensory kind of thing. But with a book, mostly if they're reading the book, it's their own imagination kind of, most of them will not know my voice. So, most people who read it will have some vision conjured up in their head of the voice talking right. as they read it, or themselves or a character, but I feel like it was just natural for me to use humor, take the edge off things, and constantly remind people that even when I talk about serious stuff, and I do talk about some serious stuff in the book, even when I talk about serious stuff, it's not that serious. We can't be that serious. The world is too crazy. Life is too chaotic, too unpredictable for us to take it too seriously.
I like that. You have to laugh at yourself and laugh at your experiences, laugh at your mistakes. And, again, the more authentic you are with all of this in your book, the more your readers are not only going to see you as a character, as you said, but also see your vulnerabilities and connect more with you. There are so many clients that I work with on a daily basis as a ghostwriter and editor who like to brag and talk about their success and, I did this, I acquired this successful client, but it's more about the faults that really do draw the readers in and make them want to believe you. It makes it more credible. So I can see how that's maybe an element that you thought about as well.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. Is that hard, getting authors to reveal their mistakes and vulnerabilities?
Yeah, and I think that has to do a lot with selling truth, for example, too. You need to get people to branch out and say, okay, I didn't just have this smooth, happy path to success. I still want you to follow my path and learn from my tips. But it's regardless of, maybe you're a perfect person and you had no, hurdles along the way. But, you have to get to know someone and get them to talk about those experiences. And that's how I get them to write it in their books sometimes.
Yeah.
But was that a challenge for you? I'm sure you included a little bit of your own struggles in the book, too.
Well, I've made no mistakes. So
you are one
I'm one of those perfect people, and but I do use several of my friends and family members as examples in the book of imperfection. No, I really think it was cathartic in a way to look at some of the things I went through and say, okay, well, first of all, if you made a little bit of a mistake or even a big mistake, then there's a chance other people will learn from it. You may learn from it yourself. And then it also is cathartic to get it out there and say, this was a mistake. And then sometimes I think I just look at both sides of it and go, like there's a story in the book about my business partners and I doing a foray into stand-up comedy where, we turned down work to do stand-up comedy, and that may not have been the most prudent thing to do. And certainly the way we did it was a little bit fantastic and not really reasonable. And here you had 4 grown men who really, at least one or two of us should have known better. But we really made a sacrifice to become really proficient stand-up comedians, all 4 of us. And but I wouldn't change it because now I'm here. And if I hadn't done that, I just would not be here in this moment. And I'd rather be here in this moment. So in the book, I talk about the fact that there's good lessons and bad lessons to learn from that. One lesson was we had turned down a very lucrative contract with a client, and our instinct was it would not go well, that it was just not a good fit. And then instead we ended up doing open mics, and we took that a little too far. We did too much, stand up and saying, well, we're going to build a production company and we're going to produce comedy videos and we're going to do this, we're going to do that. It was very ambitious, but there was no need to close part of our company, let's say, like we did, and say, well, we're going to turn down that work. The one client we turned down was a good call, but we turned down more work than we should have. And I think the idea was if you don't go all in, then you're not doing it. And the lesson I learned was you actually can go all in to the extent that something is required. If I had that to do over again, the thing I might change now I think about it is I might say, well, I would draw a line between my commitment to stand up and my commitment to the work that was sustaining us, because that would have allowed us to keep both things going. And but I learned from that whole experience, and I never made that mistake again. I never sacrificed something that was sustainable to do something bold.
Understood. I feel like there must be just a level of balance that you have to achieve when it comes to that sort of thing, between what you're passionate about and what makes you the money. So maybe that's something that, again, your book may give us some tips about, or maybe even speaking to you about it could. It's something that we all have to balance, whether it's, 2 different careers or 2 things that we like doing. Are you going to go home and watch a movie, or are you going to work on your, career, right? Like one or the other, same kind of thing, a little bit, not quite, but perhaps you're understanding what I'm getting at here.
Yeah, no, I get what you're saying, Danielle. But, the thing that is important is to avoid unhappiness. See, I've done that too in my life, where I've done a job that I really hated because I had to, right. Yeah. And I have done that, and it takes a real toll. And so what I'm prescribing isn't, well, keep the terrible job and then do your dream thing. I wasn't really, I didn't do that. I had something I was pretty happy doing and something I thought I needed to commit everything to. And so I chose, as opposed to saying, you can do more than one thing. It's not about commitment to the exclusion of everything, but it's about how do you make it happen? In other words, I have to make these 3 things happen. How do I make them all 3 happen? If that's my goal, I want to be a good father and provide for my kids, but I also want to explore this creative outlet, but I don't want to jeopardize one or the other. So how do you do it? One thing I realized when I was pretty young, because I started having kids very young, was that I really couldn't go on the road as a stand-up comedian. If that's what I wanted, that was at odds with being,
Right.
you know, a married dad. Yeah. So, you know, I made a choice not to pursue that. So I think there's a lot if you look through if you think about the book, there's a lot in there about choices.
Yeah, definitely. And about choices and about balance and everything in between. So that being said, now that we're talking a little about the book in particular, let's segue a little bit into the writing process itself. I mean, you mentioned This is your first book, but you've written many, stand-up acts, screenplays, that sort of thing. How did it differ from, the book writing process versus what you were used to?
There were good and bad parts of that process, because I think, first of all, writing a screenplay is complex, but you're not in it, unless it's a documentary type of film or a kind of exaggerated version of you or whatever. You're not really in it. You're writing about characters who don't exist in most cases. And so to that extent, you're making it up. With a nonfiction book, especially one that's supposed to help people with business, you really do need to come up with a framework first that is going to satisfy what you want to give your audience. Right. So you're not giving them, like with stand-up comedy, you're giving them laughs. With a movie, you're giving them whatever the movie is: thrills, romance, emotion, depth, whatever you might be giving them. But, my job here was to create something engaging, useful, amusing. I use the word amuseful. I say that it's amusing and useful is what I like it to be. So the process was definitely, challenging at first, because I had never done it. And anything you do for the first time, I'm sure you can attest, is challenging because you've never done it, and so you don't know what right is, essentially. But the nine knowings and the structure and working with a wonderful editor named Suzanne Kimball was really great and really helped keep me on track and focused, because feedback is important. I don't know that I would want to write a book with no feedback, right? Even though now I feel I know how to do it. So would I write my second book and feel like I know what I'm doing? I don't need anybody to give me feedback. Somebody has to give you perspective while you're doing it, I think.
Yeah, I mean, regardless of how many times you have done it, you mentioned I could do it now. I don't need any help, but that's still not the case. You always do need somebody by your side or another set of eyes to look at it, at the very least, to pick up on your spelling mistakes, if not to also think about, is this repetitive? Does this make sense? Is this something readers actually want to hear? So you need a team on your side, and that's what we do here at Authors on Mission, for example. Just somebody to over your book, be by your side, held your hand, and it's glad that it's great that you had your editor to do the same thing.
Yeah.
So that being said, this was your first book, but what's next on the radar for you? You've done so much, but there's got to be something else out there. You don't seem like somebody who's going to kick their feet up and just relax now. There's got to be something else brewing in your mind.
Yeah, definitely. Now you pegged me in that way, Danielle. Well, I'm enjoying working with clients, and I mostly am working one-on-one, but I'm opening it up now to group coaching of, executives and entrepreneurs and coaches and consultants, people who are transitioning into a new phase of their career. Most of them are accomplished, but are wanting to accomplish something new or something more. So I really enjoy that part of it, but I'm also starting work now on my next book, which is called The Inevitable Yes. And the subhead right now is the most positronic book ever written. I love the word positronic. It comes from the sci-fi writer Isaac Asimov, and it has to do with a robot that basically can do no harm.
Okay.
That's the simple explanation. But the idea of positronics to me is that you only add positivity to a situation. You don't ever add negativity. And so if you add enough positivity, the yes that you're looking for is inevitable. That's the pretense of the book. And so it's going to feel like it goes with this book, Selling the Truth, because it'll be my style again, and a nice blend of humor. But I think it'll be more philosophical and less anecdotal.
I like that.
Although I don't know. I'm sorry to interrupt you.
No, I'm sorry to interrupt you. I was just curious if there's a certain timeline that we could be looking forward to seeing this, or is it in the works currently?
Pressure. Good, pressure. Probably, I would say maybe summer 2026 would be fair, because that would be a year from now, and then I would be like, yeah, I could probably deliver it. Probably be ready a year from now.
I'd say the best thing that we can do to all of our listeners is to perhaps connect with you, and we could follow your website, social medias, and kind of stay up to date. And then, when it happens, and we'll be looking forward to it then. In that case, what kind of links can you share with us that we can get in touch?
Yeah, good plan. You can go to yesbrandbuilders.com, and everything is there. You can find the book there. You can also go to sellingthetruthbook.com, but Yes Brand Builders is great for anything that might be going on, any speaking or shows like this that I'm appearing on. Your show will be promoted there, my appearance. So that's the best place to find me. And of course, I'm on LinkedIn. If people are looking for me professionally, I am very active there.
Well, perfect. We're going to put all of those links right in the description box so that listeners go ahead and click on over, check it out, and stay in touch. I'm wondering, do you have any last bits of advice to offer our listeners today, whether it be about leadership and brand building or the writing process in general?
I would say that since we're talking about both topics, when you get into the entrepreneurial space, a lot of people will say, oh, you have to have a book. And it's a fantastic experience. But I would just say, in keeping with the idea of selling the truth, start with what's inside. Start with what's inside you. Obviously, with authors on mission and that kind of capability at their disposal, you don't have to be an author. You don't have to be a writer. It's about, mining the space that's inside you and figuring out what you want to share and what you want to say. And that way you're not struggling because you're not doing a book because you have to. You're doing a book because you have something to say. And I think we all have something to say. And it's a matter of when we're ready, when we're ready to do it.
Don't force it. Yeah,
don't force it. Look inside. Be patient, which I am not patient with myself usually, but I have to remind myself, be patient, because those great ideas, those things that are revelations for you that can help other people will come.
Right. Yeah. So, figure out when the best time for you personally is, think about what you want to say. If you don't have anything to say, don't say it, until it's the correct thing. And just wait the right moment, and it's going to be more beneficial in that way. I see exactly what you mean by that. So thank you so much for sharing your insights with us, sharing a little bit about you and about your book and about your brand. Again, everybody listening today, we're going to have the links right in the description box of this podcast today. So go ahead, click on over, check it out. And thank you so much for joining us. It's been a real pleasure.
Thank you, Danielle.
Of course. And again, everybody, Hersh really has shared a lot with us. His journey from screenwriting to comedian to brand therapist does remind us that no matter what path you're on, it can lead exactly to where you need to be when the time is right, if you're brave enough to follow the truth. And speaking of truth, be sure to check out Selling the Truth. As you know, it does offer us, there it is too. By the way, that's a huge book.
This is the hardcover.
I was going to say, it's bigger than your head.
Yeah, that's right. Selling the Truth. It is. It is a big. And that's the hardcover. But the soft cover is very tiny. It's just like that big.
I'm sure perspective-wise, it's not actually.
Yeah, that's right. Look how little that is. That's a pocket size.
That's funny. So regardless if you want the huge version or the small version, everybody please check it out. Whichever one works best for you and whatever size hands you have, I guess.
That's right, yeah.
But truly, if you've been inspired by the conversation, do check it out. You can also connect with Hersh. Links in the description of this podcast today. And remember, listeners, we're not just here to talk about authors and accomplished entrepreneurs. We're here to immerse ourselves in their world, their learning strategies, and also the writing process. So without further ado, we do thank you for listening today, and keep writing, keep inspiring, and keep leading, and continue your mission. Have a great day, everybody.
This is Danielle Hutchinson reminding you that somewhere, someone needs the book that only you can write. Visit authorsonmission.com to start your legacy. Until next time, keep leading, keep inspiring, and keep thinking in chapters. Have a great day.